They're getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
Picture that night. An 84-year-old woman in the home she had lived in for decades. She took her medication. She removed her hearing aids. She locked the door behind her the same way she had done thousands of times before. And somewhere in the hours that followed, in the complete silence of a residential neighborhood where nothing looked unusual and no neighbor heard anything and no camera captured the moment, Nancy Guthrie was gone. The next morning her seat at church was empty. Her phone was still in the house. Her medication sat untouched on the counter. The bed showed signs of the previous night. But Nancy was not there. And the question that consumed everyone who followed this case from the beginning was the same question. Who was the masked figure on that doorbell camera? Every frame was analyzed. Every shadow examined. Every movement slowed down and studied by people who had never met her and could not stop watching. But the deeper investigators and journalists moved into this case, the more a different question began to surface. Not who was the man on the porch, but who benefited from Nancy being gone. Because those two questions may not have the same answer. And the second one leads somewhere much closer to home. The financial thread entered this case quietly. Not through official channels, not through a press conference, but through a report that began circulating and could not be ignored once people started connecting it to everything else already sitting in plain sight. According to unconfirmed reports, Annie Guthrie, Nancy's closest daughter, allegedly asked her mother for a loan sometime before the disappearance. Nancy allegedly said no. That detail has never been publicly confirmed by investigators. The family has not addressed it. But the moment it appeared, something shifted in how people were reading the timeline. Because suddenly the financial picture around this case stopped looking incidental and started looking central. Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills was valued at approximately $1 million according to public records. Not a celebrity mansion but an asset of enormous significance, especially for any family carrying financial strain. Annie and Tommaso's home was estimated at around $650,000. The gap between those two numbers is not unusual on its own. Parents who purchased homes decades ago often see values increase dramatically over time. But investigators examining cases involving elderly missing persons do not look at property values the way a real estate agent would. They look at them the way a motive analyst would. $1 million home is not just a place to live. It is an inheritance. It is liquidity. It is the solution to a very specific kind of financial problem. And if someone close to Nancy had asked for help and been refused, that home stops being just mom's house and starts being something else entirely. Then came the detail that genuinely unsettled people who had been following this case casually. Nancy was living alone in a home worth close to $1 million with no functioning security cameras, no overnight caregiver, no modern alarm system, and no bedside medical alert device. Security experts who analyzed the case publicly found this difficult to reconcile. For a modest monthly cost, cloud cameras, door sensors, an emergency alert button, or a night caregiver could have been in place. None of it was. And Nancy removed her hearing aids before sleeping every night, which meant that if anything happened in those quiet hours, she may not have heard it coming at all. That gap in security did not go unnoticed online. And the question it produced was uncomfortable. Was this simply years of oversight from a family that assumed everything was fine? Or had Nancy been living in that state of vulnerability long enough that someone had taken note of exactly how accessible she was? Because from the perspective of anyone wanting to approach that house without detection, the conditions were close to ideal. An elderly woman alone. No working cameras. No one visiting overnight. Unable to hear clearly once her hearing aids were removed. The person who understood those vulnerabilities best was not a stranger. It was someone who had been inside that house many times. Someone who knew her routines. Someone who knew which cameras were not functioning. Someone who knew she would not hear movement after she went to sleep and that nobody would call to check on her until well into the following morning. That brings everything back to January 31st, 2026. Nancy called an Uber to Annie and Tommaso's house for dinner that afternoon. That journey was documented. There was app data, a timestamp, in-car footage, a driver who cooperated with the FBI. Every detail of Nancy's trip to dinner existed in verifiable record. The journey home was completely different. Nancy did not call an Uber back. According to the account given, Tommaso drove her home. From that moment forward there was no rideshare data, no traffic camera confirmation, no independent witness, no doorbell footage of Nancy entering her own house. The entire final portion of the last night anyone saw her exists almost entirely through a single account with no corroborating technology to support or contradict it. That dinner became a focal point not because a family dinner is suspicious but because of what it may have followed. If the lone refusal was real, if that conversation had happened in the weeks before, then this was not a neutral family gathering. It was a meal that came after a word that carries weight in close families. No. And sometimes that kind of conversation does not end at the table. After Nancy was supposedly dropped home, the silence that followed lasted 14 hours. No text message asking if she arrived safely. No morning call. No one drove the 4 miles between the two houses to check on an 84-year-old woman who had just been brought home at night alone. Nancy had a pacemaker. She took nightly medication. She removed her hearing aids before sleeping. The people who loved her knew all of that. And for 14 consecutive hours, not one of them made contact. From an investigative standpoint, that window is significant. Not simply because of what it says about concern, but because of what it created. 14 hours of uninterrupted time. No phone call to accidentally interrupt something. No unexpected visit. No neighbor alerted by a check-in call that something sounded wrong. The window existed not because a security system failed but because nobody voluntarily broke the silence. And that silence gave whoever entered that house almost the entire night without interruption. When the 911 call was finally made the following day, it did not come from a family member who had gone to check on her. It came after the situation had already been discovered. The family reportedly arrived at the house around 11:56 in the morning. The 911 call was logged at 12:03. 7 minutes passed between arrival and the call. In the context of finding an elderly woman missing with visible signs of disturbance in the home, 7 minutes is not nothing. What happened in those 7 minutes? What was seen first? Whether any other calls were made before the police were contacted? None of that has been answered publicly. The 911 recording itself has never been released. No transcript. No audio. No official summary. A former investigator publicly referenced the word trial when discussing why the call might be withheld, and that single word was enough to shift how people understood the silence around it. Then the power of attorney document surfaced. Unverified but widely circulated, it alleged that Tommaso had signed a document in May 2025 authorizing Annie to manage his finances and assets. Legal experts were quick to note that power of attorney documents are common instruments, frequently used in mortgage and real estate transactions, and that nothing about such a document is inherently suspicious. But the Nancy Guthrie case had never been about individual details in isolation. It had always been about sequence. May 2025, the document is allegedly signed. Months later, a loan is allegedly requested and refused. January 31, 2026, Nancy has dinner with the family. Tommaso drives her home. 14 hours of silence follow. And the next morning Nancy is gone. Each piece on its own carries a reasonable explanation. Together they form something that investigators call a timeline with internal logic. And internal logic is what separates a pattern from a coincidence. The Honda CRV connected to the family was impounded for over 40 days of forensic examination. Boxes were photographed leaving Nancy's home while she remained legally a missing person. Not deceased. Missing. And the DNA recovered from inside the house, if it belongs to individuals with no prior criminal record, changes the profile of this case entirely. No longer an outside predator emerging from anonymity. Possibly someone ordinary. Someone familiar. Someone who had stood in that house many times before and understood exactly how it operated once night fell and the hearing aids came out and the lights went off and the neighborhood went quiet. That is what makes this case continue to grow heavier the longer it remains unsolved. Nancy Guthrie did not vanish into the unknown. She may have vanished into something that was already very close to her. And the truth of what that was has not disappeared. It is simply waiting for the moment it can no longer be contained.